You can ring a bell, light a candle, or the symbols, and follow every ritual, but if your heart is absent, your God is only a reflection of convenience, not truth. Don't chase cheap gods. True faith demands the heart. These words cut to the heart of a truth that is rarely spoken but felt by those who seek real spiritual fulfillment. In a world full of symbols, rituals, and shortcuts, it is easy to confuse external observance with true devotion, to think that a quick prayer, a gesture, a ceremony, or even a show of faith can bring God closer. Ibn Arabi reminds us that God is never cheap, never convenient, and never found through mere performance. True God, true faith, and true devotion demand the entirety of the heart, the sincerity of intention, and the courage to confront oneself honestly. Consider the person who enters a temple, rings a bell, offers incense, and leaves thinking their duty is done. The symbols were there, the ritual was performed, yet the heart may remain untouched. The outward action is visible, tangible, and comforting, but it cannot purify the inner self. Ibn Arabi would say that God's closeness is measured not by the number of bells rung or the incense burned, but by the depth of presence within the seeker. The heart must be awake, aware, and surrendered. Otherwise, the devotion is a mask, a cheap imitation, a God made convenient for human comfort. Rumi once said, "Don't get lost in your rituals, but find the heart that beats behind them." This is the essence of what it means to avoid cheap gods. Religion and rituals are tools, but tools alone cannot construct the architecture of the soul. They guide, but they do not replace inner work. When a heart is closed, when pride, fear, ego, or distraction dominate, no bell, no mantra, no ceremony can open the door to the divine. The search for God becomes a superficial quest, a performance for the eyes of the world, rather than a journey of the soul. Ibn Arabi teaches that the heart is the true temple. In it resides the capacity for divine presence, insight, and transformation. To find God cheaply is to seek the shadow and ignore the source. True faith is expensive in effort, because it requires honesty, humility, reflection, and courage. It demands that one confront the darkest corners of the self, the grudges, the fears, the insecurities, and the attachments that we hold dear, and surrender them without expectation of reward or comfort. True devotion is laborious, intimate, and often uncomfortable, but it is the only path where the divine manifests in its fullness. Consider what modern life has done to spiritual practice. Convenience has become the measure of devotion. Online prayers, quick affirmations, Instagram spirituality, these may give temporary satisfaction, but they do not transform the heart. They are the cheap gods of our time. Ibn Arabi reminds us that God does not reside in convenience or superficiality. The divine requires attention, sincerity, and sacrifice, the willingness to feel, to suffer, and to love without calculation. Even contemporary thinkers echo this truth. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Awakening requires commitment. It requires choosing the hard path, the path that asks more than the eyes or ears, it asks the heart. And when the heart is fully invested, when devotion is authentic and pure, every action becomes imbued with meaning. Every ritual becomes a doorway, and the soul begins to resonate with the divine in ways no external performance can replicate. So, do not chase gods that are cheap, convenient, or superficial. Do not settle for rituals that comfort your pride or habits that reassure your ego. The God worth finding demands the entirety of your heart, the surrender of self, and the courage to look beyond appearances and into essence. This is not a God of symbols alone, but a God of presence, love, and transformation. Ibn Arabi would say, "The temple is not in stone or wood, it is in the sanctuary of the heart, and only the heart that seeks truly will find." Outer rituals cannot replace inner devotion, because the human soul is designed to encounter the divine in the depth of its own awareness, not through actions performed superficially or mechanically. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that the heart is the true temple, the sacred space where God manifests, where intention is measured, and where transformation begins. So when a person rings a bell, lights a candle, recites prayers, or performs elaborate rituals without presence, sincerity, or understanding, the outward actions may be visible to others, but they remain empty, like a house without light or warmth. And this emptiness is often disguised by the comfort of habit, social approval, and the illusion of fulfillment, leading many to believe that outward conformity equivalent to spiritual progress. Yet the saints and sages throughout history have consistently warned that God measures not the ceremony, but the heart, not the visible act, but the inner engagement, not the repetition, but the attention. And this principle applies universally, whether in temples, churches, mosques, or meditation halls, because the divine does not reside in objects or places, but in consciousness, awareness, and surrender. And so a person who practices rituals without introspection or presence, essentially attempting to substitute form for substance, appearance for reality, and activity for awakening. And this substitution creates a spiritual imbalance that can manifest as restlessness, dissatisfaction, or a subtle emptiness that lingers despite the apparent correctness of behavior, because the soul knows the difference between genuine encounter and performed duty, between real love and imitation, between authentic devotion and habitual motion. And this distinction is crucial for anyone who seeks to experience true faith. And Ibn Arabi emphasizes that every ritual must be infused with attention, every prayer must be accompanied by presence, every offering must be guided by sincerity. Otherwise, the effort becomes a mirror reflecting only the ego, the desire to be seen as devout, or the comfort of routine. And these motives, however disguised, prevent the heart from opening fully to the divine. And when the heart remains closed, no outward act, however elaborate, can compensate. No chant can awaken what is sleeping. No bow or posture can awaken consciousness that is distracted. And the more one relies on external symbols without cultivating inner devotion, the further one drifts from the essence of faith, because the divine responds not to quantity or spectacle, but to depth, not to formality, but to authenticity, not to habit, but to engagement. And this is why saints have always prioritized the cultivation of the heart over the multiplication of rituals, the purification of intention over the perfection of ceremony, the awakening of awareness over the accumulation of actions. And yet in contemporary times, the temptation to equate busy schedules, outward observances, and public displays of spirituality with progress is stronger than ever, fueled by social norms, cultural expectations, and the human desire for recognition. And Ibn Arabi would remind us that true progress is invisible, measured in the stillness of the heart, the honesty of self-reflection, the courage to face inner flaws, the willingness to surrender attachments, and the persistent effort to align every act, thought, and intention with divine truth. And when this alignment begins, rituals no longer feel empty, practices no longer feel mechanical, and devotion becomes alive, breathing through the body, radiating through the mind, and saturating the soul, because the energy of a present, attentive heart transforms even the simplest action into a channel for divine connection. And this is the subtle magic that separates a practiced ritual from a lived spiritual experience, a performance from a prayer, a habit from holiness. And this distinction is what makes the difference between chasing cheap symbols and walking the path of genuine devotion. And the journey requires patience, courage, awareness, and persistence, because the heart will resist, distractions will arise, and the comfort of routine will tempt one to settle. But every moment of sincere attention, every act infused with intention, every effort to be fully present in ritual, thought, and prayer slowly purifies the heart, awakens awareness, and opens the gateway to a living, breathing connection with the divine, which no outward gesture alone could ever achieve. A true faith demands sincerity and courage, because the journey toward genuine spiritual connection is never easy. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that faith is not measured by convenience, comfort, or superficial performance, but by the depth of the heart's engagement, the willingness to confront one's own flaws, and the courage to surrender the ego. pride, and attachments that cloud the soul. And many people are attracted to religion or spirituality not for inner transformation, but for validation, social approval, or the comfort of routine, believing that repeated actions, prayers, or rituals can substitute for inner work. Yet the saints and mystics throughout history have warned that convenience produces only superficiality, that shortcuts never lead to the heart, and that only through sincerity and courage can a person experience the transformative power of the divine. And sincerity itself is not a trivial act. It requires awareness of every thought, every intention, every action, and the honesty to see oneself as one truly is, not as one wishes to appear. And this honesty is often terrifying because it exposes hidden resentment, unacknowledged fears, and suppressed desires that the ego has worked hard to hide. And courage is required to face these truths without fleeing into distraction, blame, or denial. And when a seeker approaches faith with both sincerity and courage, every ritual, every prayer, every act of devotion becomes alive, infused with presence, and capable of transforming not just the mind but the heart, because the divine responds not to habit or repetition, but to the awakened soul that engages fully, willingly, and honestly. And this is why cheap faith, faith that demands no effort, no reflection, no personal confrontation, is always shallow and incapable of sustaining the soul through trials, challenges, or moments of doubt. And many modern seekers are tempted by convenience, looking for God in rituals that require no change, spirituality that requires no responsibility, and devotion that carries no risk. Yet Ibn Arabi teaches that the path of faith is inherently challenging because it requires the seeker to leave comfort behind, to question deeply held beliefs, to relinquish attachments, and to face the shadows within. And in doing so, the heart slowly transforms, the ego softens, the soul awakens, and clarity begins to replace confusion. Humility begins to replace pride, and love begins to replace fear. And this process is often uncomfortable, disorienting, and even painful, because the deeper one goes into the heart, the more one discovers what has been hidden or denied for years. And courage is required to remain in the process, to confront emotional wounds, to acknowledge mistakes, to forgive oneself and others, and to act with honesty even when the world values appearances over truth. And sincerity ensures that actions are aligned with intentions, that outward expressions of faith are not empty, and that every prayer, meditation, or act of service is grounded in authentic connection rather than performance. And without these qualities, devotion becomes mechanical, habits replace awareness, and spirituality is reduced to a checklist or a performance for others, while the heart remains untouched. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that the divine is not pleased by appearances, but by the genuine engagement of the soul, by the courage to seek truth in every circumstance, by the willingness to surrender control, and by the sincerity to confront oneself honestly in every moment. And this inner courage is what allows a person to move beyond fear, doubt, and ego-driven desires, creating a space where divine wisdom can enter, where guidance can be received, and where the heart can truly awaken. And as the seeker continues this practice, sincerity and courage reinforce each other, creating a feedback loop in which authenticity deepens, awareness expands, and the soul becomes capable of holding greater light, greater love, and greater understanding. And in this way, faith ceases to be an external obligation and becomes a lived reality, a transformation of the heart that affects perception, action, and relationship. And those who embrace this path find that their devotion no longer feels forced or empty. Rituals are no longer mechanical, and the connection with the divine becomes intimate, alive, and sustaining, not because the practices themselves are magical, but because the heart is fully awake, fully engaged, fully surrendered. And through this awakened engagement, the seeker discovers the profound truth that true faith is inherently courageous and intrinsically sincere, demanding presence, honesty, and the willingness to transform from within. Cheap gods are found in convenience, not in commitment, because the human tendency is to seek ease, shortcuts, and quick results in every aspect of life, and spirituality is no exception. Yet Ibn Arabi reminds us that the divine cannot be approached through convenience, that shortcuts, superficial acts, and shallow rituals can never replace the depth of genuine devotion. And many people spend years performing rituals, attending ceremonies, or following prescribed routines thinking that these actions alone can bring them closer to God, while the heart remains untouched, the ego unexamined, and the soul stagnant. And this is why the cheap God exists only in appearances, in symbols, in gestures that look like devotion but carry no weight, no presence, and no transformation. And those who pursue these gods are seeking comfort, reassurance, or validation rather than truth. And the tragedy is that the more one chases convenience, the further one drifts from the living reality of faith, because genuine spiritual connection requires effort, persistence, and willingness to confront oneself fully, to see one's flaws, to face one's fears, and to surrender attachments and illusions. And convenience offers none of this. Instead, it seduces with immediate gratification, outward recognition, and the illusion of spiritual progress, and in doing so, it traps the seeker in a cycle of superficiality, where actions are performed but the heart remains disengaged. Rituals are repeated but the soul remains unchanged, and devotion becomes performance, habit, or social expectation. And Ibn Arabi teaches that the heart is the true seat of God's presence, the living sanctuary where intention, sincerity, and awareness converge, and only a committed heart, willing to pay the price of effort, reflection, and self-confrontation, can access the divine, while a convenient faith, a cheap God, can offer only temporary comfort, an empty feeling of achievement, or a false sense of security. And many modern practices, from quick affirmations to social media spirituality, are examples of cheap gods, providing visible signs of devotion, but bypassing the inner work necessary for transformation. And the danger is that such convenience masquerades as progress, encouraging the seeker to believe that effort is unnecessary, that engagement can be superficial, and that results can be immediate, while in truth the spiritual path is measured not by speed or comfort but by depth, consistency, and courage. And the more the seeker is willing to commit fully, to act with sincerity, to embrace discomfort, and to face the hidden corners of the soul, the richer and more authentic their relationship with the divine becomes. And this commitment transforms every ritual, every action, every intention, because when the heart is fully engaged, even the simplest act is infused with meaning, becoming a conduit for presence, awareness, and divine connection. And Ibn Arabi often emphasized that commitment is costly not in a negative sense, but in the sense that it requires one to be awake, to be honest, and to be fully present, to move beyond performance and appearance, and to enter the inner sanctuary where the divine resides, where the ego is examined, where the soul is purified, and where awareness expands. And those who seek convenience are tempted by shortcuts. But shortcuts can never replace presence. Shortcuts can never replace honesty. Shortcuts can never replace effort, because the divine requires the heart, and the heart cannot be summoned by habit, routine, or ease. And commitment involves the courage to endure doubt, the patience to face trials, the willingness to persist even when progress is invisible, and the openness to accept discomfort as a teacher. And through this commitment, the seeker discovers the living truth that God is not found in the cheap, the convenient, or the easy, but in surrender, attention, and presence. And the cheap God may comfort temporarily, may offer reassurance, may appear approachable, but it cannot awaken, transform, or illuminate the soul. And the essence of faith is precisely this transformation, this awakening, this illumination, which requires full-hearted commitment, persistent effort, and the courage to let go of everything that is superficial, convenient, or habitual. And when a seeker embraces this path, the heart becomes alive, rituals become meaningful, devotion becomes real, and every act, no matter how small, becomes infused with the presence of the divine, not because the external form has changed, but because the inner heart has committed fully to the truth, to sincerity, and to the awakening that alone can reveal God beyond convenience, beyond shortcuts, and beyond cheap appearance, as the heart is the real temple, because it is the sacred space where the divine chooses to reside, where intention is measured, and where true transformation begins. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that no external structure, ritual, or object can substitute for the presence of God within the heart, because a temple built of stone may be magnificent, adorned with symbols, and filled with ceremonies. Yet if the seeker's heart is closed, distracted, or insincere, the divine presence cannot manifest there, and this principle applies universally across all spiritual traditions, emphasizing that inner cultivation is the foundation upon which any authentic spiritual experience is built. And the human tendency to equate external forms with divine closeness is one of the greatest traps in the spiritual journey, because convenience, habit, and spectacle can create an illusion of devotion while the soul remains untouched. And this is why true seekers must return repeatedly to the heart, examining intention, presence, and awareness. For the heart is where the divine meets the human, where love and consciousness intertwine, where surrender and courage coexist, and where every inner movement has consequences for perception, action, and spiritual growth. And Ibn Arabi teaches that the divine does not dwell in appearances, but in the subtle reality of the heart, in the alignment of intention with action, and in the sincerity that penetrates beyond ritual, form, or habit. And when the heart is fully awake and purified, even the simplest act becomes a channel for divine connection. Every gesture, every prayer, every breath infused with meaning,